All right, well, welcome everyone. Welcome to the last event of the fall 2020 A.P.E.X season. My name is Lynn Vartan. I am the curator of A.P.E.X events, and I also teach in the music department. I want to start by saying thank you so much to everyone. Thank you to all of the students and faculty and community members who have attended in person for our events, and also thank you to all of you who have attended online. It's been so wonderful to see 50, 60 people attending our webinars and watching these great events as we produce the season. We made it. A.P.E.X made it all the way through, and it was with all of your support and help, encouragement, the positivity. We're so happy to have shared these events with you this season. So I'd like to thank also our collaborators throughout the season and those to come. We will be starting our spring season in January, and we're going to start close to home with the Southern Utah Paranormal Society. So check that out if you want to know some of the spooky stuff. They're going to be talking about all the different things that they've tracked in our skies and in around our town. So that'll be exciting. Please do look at the spring lineup for events. And faculty, if you're watching and if you're here in attendance, we want to partner with you. We would love to be a part of your class, a part of your curriculum. I have assignments for you in Canvas that you can use and copy into your class. We want you to use these events as part of your curriculum and part of your learning. Let us help you. Let us be a part of your course. Just get in touch with me anytime. But today we are talking politics. Okay, this is a feisty topic, I know, and I know we're all tired and we're ready to get through to the end of the year. I've even got wings on my shoes to get me through the end of the semester. But it's a great time to kind of share and get some ideas. And we're going to be featuring political journalism and talking about what is journalism, what kinds of things we can do, and learning about our guest, his trajectory in journalism. So, Bryan Schott has been covering Utah politics for more than 2 decades. He brings his deep knowledge and intense passion for political journalism to the Salt Lake Tribune. You'll usually find him in his signature white frame glasses, prowling the back hallways of the Utah Capitol, searching for scoops. He also hosts the Utah Politics with Bryan Schott podcast. This is our annual collaboration with the Michael O. Levitt Center for Politics, and it has been so fun to do this event as our closing event of the season. So thank you to Mary Weaver Bennett for being a collaborator and for this ongoing annual collaboration. So without further ado, I would love to invite to the stage Bryan Schott and Mary Weaver Bennett. Well, welcome you two. Thank you for being here. It has been a long road of the semester, and I'm just so happy. Thank you for making the drive down today. You came down this morning from Salt Lake, is that right?
Actually, my first time out of Salt Lake since March.
Cool. And then maybe Tony, let's make sure we've got all of the mics on. Yeah, awesome. Great. So this is your first time out of Salt Lake since March. Wow. How does it feel to be down south?
It's good. I mean, I wish the circumstances were a little bit different, but
yeah.
How it is.
Yeah, well, thank you for making the trek. I would love to just start with a little bit of your kind of background and history, and you're currently with the Salt Lake Tribune, but I'd love to know a little bit about sort of how you got from there to here, so to speak, and your trajectory as a journalist.
Well, it all started, I was 13 years old in a small town in northeastern Colorado, and I was a freshman in high school, and my teacher, Mr. Kreitzer, came up to me and said, "You like to talk. The local radio station is looking for someone to kind of do stuff at night, to do newscasts and things." I went out, I read some news stuff for them, and they hired me. And I have been in media since then.
Wow.
I keep telling everyone, if I had to do a real job, I'd probably end up killing myself because I don't think I could do the same thing every day.
Yeah.
So I started when I was 13. I worked nights and weekends, just a really small station. We basically covered part of northeastern Colorado. My hometown is about 5,000 people. So
right, small.
we did that. By the time so I started doing nights and weekends, and then one day the program director came to me and said, "Hey, we need someone to work on Sunday." I said, "Sure, I can work." He goes, "Okay, and you're doing the polka hour."
Polka?
Yeah, I knew nothing about it, but they threw me in with a bunch of polka records, so I would host that, and then ended up doing Swap Shop, which. Are you familiar with what a swap shop is?
Yes.
Yeah, it's kind of like
one in Cedar.
Yeah, it's kind of like I guess Craigslist on the radio.
Right.
We do it for 2 hours every Saturday, and it was crazy. That was it was all good experience. By the time I graduated, I was calling play-by-play for 7 local high schools. So I would do games Thursday, Friday, and Saturday.
I see.
And just drive all over. Went to college, worked at the campus radio station there. After college, came home, back to the same station for a little bit, and then I got my break. I got hired by KOA News Radio in Denver.
Okay.
Moved to Denver, big news talker there that hit parts of 50 states and Canada at night. And then from there, I was hired by David Locke, who's now the play-by-play voice of the Jazz, to come out and help start the K-Fan radio station in Salt Lake City.
Oh.
So I came out for that. After about a year and a half, I decided I wanted to get back into news, got into public radio, back and forth, worked for KSL for a little while. And then more than a decade ago, I was approached by LeVar Webb, who had a small newsletter called Utah Policy. And he said, you're really good at doing a lot with not much resources. I want you to come do this. And I said to myself, okay, this is where everything's going. And if I want to keep my job, keep doing this, I'm going to have to learn how to do all this stuff.
I see.
So I had to learn how to, I can't do a lot of coding, but I can do some, and I produce my own podcast now, and I can edit video and do all that stuff online. So you have to be, I guess, multi-talented. And the reason I realized that, I won a journalism fellowship where we went to Germany. They have this thing called RIAS. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
No.
RIAS, it stands for Radio in the American Sector. So what happened was in Berlin, when it was divided up into 4 after World War II, there was an American-funded radio station that beamed into the Soviet-controlled East Germany. And when the wall fell, they still had a bunch of money. And so they turned it into a trust. They're no longer like a radio station anymore, but they do a journalism exchange. So I went over there, and we went into the offices of Der Spiegel. And they had an internship program. It was more of an apprenticeship program. And I'm standing in what looks like a normal newsroom. It was a newsroom desk. It looked like the bullpen, everything. But I'm standing here, and over here is an audio booth, and over here is a video editing thing. And I'm like, these kids who are coming up are learning to tell stories in many different ways. So if you're a print journalist, I'm like, oh, it's changing. You're going to have to learn to do this stuff. So it was mostly self-preservation.
Yeah.
Why I took that job with Utah Policy, and then after this election cycle, I was lucky enough to be approached by the Tribune and hired to go over there.
Oh, fantastic. I love so many of the things that you mentioned there. First of all, the storytelling aspect has been something we've been noticing with several of our events this semester, how the art of storytelling exists in every discipline. And I also love the fact that you really highlighted the curiosity or self-preservation, as the case may be, to get in and learn a new skill, gather a new skill set to get whatever job done that you need to get done. So thank you for that. How about politics? It seems like you've been focused on politics. Is that something you were always passionate about, or it just kind of became more important to you as you saw trends?
I was thinking about this last night, and I have always loved it. I've loved politics. Ted Wilson, who is former mayor of Salt Lake City, he had when he was with the Hinckley Institute of Politics, he had a sign in his office. Whenever I'd go up to talk to him, I'd always love this sign. And it said, politics is the only true sport. Everything else is a game for children. And
that's great.
I love that, because to me, it is a game. And I love the fact that someone will pay me to do this, so I get to keep doing it. But I love being able to go up to the Capitol, And I don't necessarily go to whatever hearing is happening that day or pay attention to what floor debate, because to me, that's not where the story is. The story is what's happening outside of there. So when I would cover the Senate, there's a spot, and I call it lurking, right? I call it lurking, but there is literally a spot that I stand right outside the Senate floor before floor time. And all the senators come by, and I talk to every single one of them, and I'll always say, hey, anything going on? That's how you find stuff out. And I love being able to find that out. Because if you listen, they will say things to you, and you'll just get little tidbits, and it's a thread to pull. For instance, I did a story within the last couple of weeks when the new mask mandate came in.
Yeah.
I was calling around because I'd heard that this was coming, and I'm talking to people, and I'm texting people up on the Hill, and one person said, yeah, I heard that they're not going to close down the schools, and the legislature is not going to call itself into special session as an exchange for not closing things down. And I'm like, oh, that's interesting.
That's interesting.
And so I take that ball and I start to run with it, and it turned out to be a really good story.
Yeah.
Where there was talk about another lockdown. It didn't get very, very far, but there was talk about that. So there are things happening, and I see my job to find those things out. I had a member of the legislature text me the other day and said, I appreciate how thorough you are in your job. There will be times that I don't necessarily welcome that thoroughness, but I appreciate how thorough you are. And that's one of the things that I find is that I try to treat everyone up there fairly, because I know that many of them are not going to like what I write. They're not going to like what I report. But if they feel like I've treated them fairly in the story, that I've told the story fairly, then I've done my job. You can be mad at me for that sort of thing, but as long as you feel like I've given you a fair shake, I'm not attacking you. I'm not necessarily, unless you deserve some criticism.
Right.
But to me, everyone talks about, well, are you balanced? Are you biased? It's not balance. It's fairness, right? Right. If you've presented the issue fairly, because everyone says, well, you have to look at both sides equally. No, you don't. Very rarely are there two equal sides to an argument. Right. You consider both sides. Yeah. You can talk about that, but to present them in an equal light, I don't think is the fair way to approach this. And I found that doing that has given me a lot of access. Has given people, they are willing to talk to me because they know that I'm going to be fair with them.
Yeah, okay. That is the perfect segue to get into what I want to talk next, which is about bringing that fairness to finding real news. We hear so much about fake news and all of this, and one of the things I'd really like to zero in on today is how to empower our students and our community with the agency to find the fairness in everything and kind of open up the conversation to where do you find fair news, good news? What are the earmarks of it? So maybe let's just start there. Being somebody who believes in fair news and writing fair reports and this kind of thing, how do we as consumers find out if something is fair? What are some earmarks that students can look for?
Well, one of the problems in this country is there's no literacy about the news, about knowing what you're reading, if it's well reported. One of the things that I run into when I'm talking with someone, and I say, well, the New York Times said something, and they're like, New York Times, LOL. They don't, and they just think the New York Times just makes stuff up. And that's not the way it works. The people who work at the Times, these reporters, they have a very rigorous process that they go through to even get that story to the web page to print. There's a very rigorous process, but that has been completely discounted, and now you're seeing people get their news online, Facebook. I read an article that during the election, they were talking with a voter in Wisconsin, and she had a comment, and it just made my heart drop, that she gets her news from YouTube. Mm-hmm. and you just want to grab them and say that's not news. But people seem to think news is whatever, I guess, confirms their biases.
Yeah.
They don't want to read things that are, I guess, contrary to what they believe. I consciously spend time swimming in many different parts of the media culture. And I spend time in some pretty gross parts too, where you read stuff and you're like, oh, this is just horrible. But there are people out there believing it. Another problem we have is everybody just gets they get their news from the headline. They read the headline, they don't read the article.
Right.
And you just want to say, read the article, but nobody does. Nobody wants to do that.
What is the way out of that? How do we change that? What's your advice?
Well, it's remarkable how quickly social media has destroyed the news business, and is really, I see it as almost a threat to our democracy, because in our country, a democracy requires that we all have an agreed on set of facts.
Right.
We used to, I have very fond memories of sitting with my grandmother and watching Walter Cronkite. That's what we did. We sat down, we watched Walter Cronkite, we had the news delivered. And it wasn't this constant news cycle. But that was an agreed upon set of facts. We're not there anymore. People read what they want to read. They go to different media, ecosystems. There's a conservative media ecosystem. And some of it, and I'm not dismissing all conservative media ecosystems. Some of it is quite good. Everyone dismisses Fox News. There's a difference between news and opinion. The news, the dayside Fox reporters, they're quite good. They do a very good job of reporting the news. It's the nighttime, sewer that is just all opinion. Tucker Carlson is not news. Laura Ingraham is not news. Sean Hannity is not news. Lou Dobbs is not news. These people are not news. They are commentators, but people see it as news.
As news, right.
Right, and so there's no questioning, because it confirms their biases. And you just see this, it's this constant message of what's being pumped, into their brains. And it's not that people are helpless. They are choosing to consume this stuff.
I see.
They're going on and reading people who read Breitbart, or they'll watch OANN, or they'll watch Newsmax, which is the new one. And there's just, they will say stuff that is completely untrue, and they don't care. And no one will call them out. And if someone from a legacy news operation like the New York Times, like the Washington Post, like even CNN, were to go on and say some of these things, but maybe with a different slant, say things about the president that wasn't true, they would get fired.
Right.
Newsmax, they make more money. OANN, they make more money, they get more subscribers. That's the war that we're fighting against.
I see.
Where it's very hard for me to understand the lack of critical thinking that we have. People just don't think critically about the news that they're consuming, and it makes me very, very sad.
Well, I want to definitely get Mary involved, but before I'll let her get her first question ready. But one of the things is, I've been very impressed with your podcast, Utah Politics, and you do talk to people on all different sides. You had a great conversation with Mitt Romney recently. I was really impressed by that one and several of them. So we definitely want to let everybody know about that. But I wondered if you might make a couple of recommendations in your opinion and with your background and experience, kind of on both sides of some news sources that perhaps maybe you can recommend.
Well, the problem is, and as someone who's been doing this for a number of decades, I've learned that there are a couple of hard and fast rules that you have to have, or at least that I live by, and I tell people this. If you're going to report the news, there are two things you need. You have to have good information, and you have to be interesting. Okay. Because if you have good information, if you're not interesting, no one's going to watch it, right? Or no one's going to pay attention to it. But if you don't have good information, you better be really interesting. I call that the Glenn Beck corollary.
Right.
Because Glenn Beck, when he was a big thing in the media, the stuff he said was just insane, but I couldn't stop watching him because it was so fascinating. But there are some good sources out there. I do like people who are trying to innovate in the news space. I was lucky enough to attend a conference last year in Chicago. The Chicago Institute of Politics. It's David Axelrod from CNN. He does one every 4 years called the Campaign Journalism Conference, and they bring in journalists who are going to be covering the next campaign. And it was fascinating to me because I'm sitting there in this room, and there were young journalists who were right out of J school, right out of journalism school. And I would talk to them. I said, "Where are you going to be working?" They said, "I have no idea. I just got hired. What's going to happen is I go from here, I go to New York, maybe to CBS or wherever, and I get my assignment. I might be spending a year on the ground in Iowa. I might be spending a year covering this campaign." Right. And it was really fascinating. But one of the guest speakers was Peter Hamby, who was he's a brilliant reporter, used to be at CNN. He's not there anymore. But he said, and I agreed with this, spend time as a journalist, and I think this is good as a news consumer too, spend time in places that make you feel uncomfortable. Spend times in places you normally wouldn't. And he's doing that right now. He has a show on Snapchat, and it's called Good Luck America. And it is, I believe it's 3 to 5 times a week. It's 2 minutes, it's news, it's really well produced. I'm in my 50s, and I downloaded Snapchat just so I could watch that show.
That's
There's
awesome.
another one, Tim Miller. He was sort of with Republican voters against Trump. Young guy, really smart. He also has one called Not My Party. It's more of a conservative bent. They're both really good shows.
And they're both on Snapchat.
They're both on Snapchat.
That's fascinating. Okay.
And it is a place where I am uncomfortable. I don't understand the first thing about Snapchat. I don't do anything else on Snapchat other than watch these shows but they're good. In fact, the day I downloaded Snapchat, my son texted my daughter and said, "Alert, Dad has just downloaded Snapchat. This is not a drill."
Right.
So, but it's a place that makes me uncomfortable. I don't understand anything else about it.
Yeah.
But these are good news sources. These are guys who care about telling the truth, and they're doing it in an interesting way.
Oh, cool.
Trying to get it out to people, which is, it's that entrepreneurial spirit. And so you're seeing a lot of that. You're also seeing a lot of journalists who are trying to strike out on their own right now. There's a huge uptick in people using Substack, which is that self-publishing platform with newsletters. I don't know how long that boom is going to last, but there are some people out there who are trying something new, and some of it is going to stick, right? And the people who stick around, they've got something to offer that people are going to watch. So what I would say is read stuff that you don't agree with, right? And then spend some time asking some questions and maybe finding some, and you'll come to some good sources.
That's great advice. Thank you. All right, Mary, I don't want to jeopardize. I want to give you time.
And I think that's another great thing you mentioned about Snapchat is that many people don't want to spend the time to read the New York Times article. And so we need to have a place where there is short form journalism, places that run on journalistic standards, but that are in a short 3-minute burst. And you get true news, and it's not a Facebook post, So I think differentiating those kinds of things on social media platforms is very important to be able to do. So thank you for that. I want to talk a little bit more about facts and the state of facts in the nation. I think that this recent election has shown us that we're now able to operate under 2 parallel sets of reality. And I'm talking now about the major political parties, but we have 2 parallel sets of reality. And you were mentioning earlier the Monmouth poll recently that said 77% of Trump voters believe that Joe Biden did not win the election.
Fairly. He won because of fraud.
Okay.
Is what they believe.
And so how go back to the country having a common set of facts?
I hope we do. I hope we can. I think we have to, because what we're doing right now, I do not believe is sustainable. Not only I mean, it's not sustainable for us as a democracy. And you know, it's interesting to look at some of the stories that came out during the election. I'm sure that some people heard a little bit, at least, about the Hunter Biden laptop. It's quite interesting that story has completely gone away now that the election's over. But you know, that was omnipresent in right-wing media, and they talked about it in such a way that if you were not steeped in Fox News 7-8 hours a day, you had no idea what the hell they were talking about, right? They talked about it in just in such a way, and it was so I guess there was a lot of minutia to understand. But if you're not part of that, you're not understanding what it is. But that was a really big deal in the conservative media ecosystem. You know, other news organizations looked into it, and they did their due diligence in reporting and found out that, you know, it's not much of a story, but that was a big deal. Meanwhile, at the same time, what was in the mainstream media, or it's COVID, right? That's what we're talking about, because that is but that's not permeating what's happening on the right, you know, or I guess I don't want to say on the right, but in a lot of these conservative media cultures, people are watching YouTube channels, people are watching, they're getting their news from Facebook. There was a really interesting tracking of, I guess, one of the stories about election fraud. And people were just really this person I follow on Twitter was showing how this thing got into into the conservative media ecosystem. What happens now is somebody on YouTube will post one of their videos and they'll make some sort of allegation. This is where a lot of this, the thing, I'm sure that you've heard about the Dominion voting machines, right? That's a big thing in conservative culture, and they say that this Dominion voting machines, they have ties to Venezuela, and anyway, that started on some random YouTube video where somebody just made this allegation without any proof. That was picked up. That nugget was picked up by Twitter. People saw it on Twitter, and then it went right through Facebook. But the interesting thing of Facebook is it was going through about 95% of the activity of it on Facebook was in private Facebook groups where researchers, journalists, we can't see that stuff, but that's where it's spreading. So it's spreading there, and then it gets out farther. So that's how this spread is happening. It's going through these private Facebook groups. It goes from YouTube to Twitter to Facebook, and then out from there and onto other social media channels, Parler, those other places. And so it's really hard to fight that when it's just so quick. I mean, things happen so quickly. I think that story bubbled up in a matter of 48 hours before it was a huge thing on Fox News and on Newsmax and on Breitbart, because that's where they're getting a lot of their story sources.
Wow. So what do you think the legacy of Donald Trump is with regards to factual information coming from the White House?
Well, the thing about Donald Trump, and I've thought a lot about this, but when you hear conservatives, when you hear Republicans, and it just happened this week, the Senate grilling social media companies saying they are biased against conservatives, right? They don't think that really. What they're doing is they're working the refs, right? They're working. It's like in sports. You watch a college basketball game, and the coach is just yelling at the refs all the time, hoping to get a good call. So they're working the refs. This has been a long time thing. You allege bias in the media, you allege bias. So what happens is they start to get a little bit gun shy, and they start to, move a little bit in your direction and give you the benefit of the doubt. And I think that that's where a lot of what Trump has said. In fact, Leslie Stahl, when she did that interview with Trump that he walked out on, she said, you told me once that you yell fake news when we report something that you don't like, because what that does is it delegitimizes it. The problem is a lot of people who are following this don't know the rules of the game. So it is fake news. It is made up. You hear people rail against the use of anonymous sources. I use anonymous sources, right? But the problem is, I think a lot of people think that when they hear anonymous sources, they think it's someone they just made up out of whole cloth. And that's not the process. If I have an anonymous source, if I have someone who gives me a news tip, I have a very long conversation with my editor. And we say, okay, who is it? Okay, I have to tell them, it's so-and-so. And this is what they told me. Why do you think that they told you? Well, I think that I think their motivation is this. They're trying to do that. So we have that long conversation, and then we decide: do we use it? Do we give them the cover of not using their name, right? But that is not a process. It's a process that's hard to explain. You have to explain it. Meanwhile, it's easier to say, oh, they just completely made it up, right? And in politics, if you're explaining, you're losing.
Interesting.
If you ever see a candidate who is trying to explain what they really meant or explain what their position, they're losing. They are losing, because it's a lot easier to say fake news. Well, it's not fake news because of this, and this, and this. No one's going to pay attention to the explanation.
Yes.
They're just going to say fake news.
I'd love to just dovetail for a minute on something that Mary was saying, because I'm really curious both of your opinions on it. You mentioned these parallel realities, which I think we all are seeing that. And I just wonder if any of you have experienced on a smaller scale such a thing happening where you have a parallel reality and then it coming back together, or are we in completely uncharted territory where are there any examples in history or even on a smaller scale where you've got these sort of parallel realities that come back together, and if so, how? Or is this completely uncharted territory?
Well, at some point, reality does invade the, pop that bubble. I think of the Iraq War. Right?
Okay.
There was the parallel reality that Saddam Hussein was developing weapons of mass destruction.
Right.
Colin Powell going before the UN and making a very good case it was happening. But years later we found out that that wasn't the case. But we had already gone to war and the damage had been done.
Yeah, that's the worry, right?
I look at what's happening right now with the coronavirus. There was an astonishing thread. I don't know if any of you saw it on Twitter, but there was a nurse, an ICU nurse in North Dakota, and she was talking about how she has people in her ICU dying of COVID, and they are insisting that they do not have COVID because it's fake and it's a hoax and it's not real.
Oh, wow.
And they are literally dying from this. And they're like, no, I am not dying from COVID. And then when reality finally sets in with them, they start screaming about how they need how there's a miracle drug out there, or she said that they'll be FaceTiming with their families as they're dying and railing against them. How did you let me believe this, right?
Oh, wow.
How did you not tell me that this was a hoax? But these people keep saying, they're literally strapped to an ICU. She said they only really shut up when they go on a ventilator,
yeah.
right? And that's reality coming in. But, that's a very, I read that and I was just astonished that someone could be dying in a hospital, dying from this, and insisting to their dying breath that this was not real. I am not dying of COVID because COVID is a hoax. That just astonished me. How do we as a country even begin to battle this pandemic, begin to address it, when you've got people who are in the hospital saying it's not real?
Right.
I can't wrap my head around that.
Yeah.
It really terrifies me.
Yeah.
Because if that's where we are right now, and I think we're seeing the consequences of that, because it's 9 months later and we're still wearing masks.
Right.
And we're not getting to the point where we can accept that this is something that we need to attack. This is something we need to address. We can't decide how to do it, or even if it's real. What's going to happen the next time we have a big crisis?
Yeah.
I really fear that this refusal to accept reality, to agree on a shared set of facts, I hope I'm wrong, but I think we're heading into a really dark time in our democracy, and I just don't know how it sustains. I think it's going to look. I hope I'm wrong, but I think it's going to look really different. 10 years from now.
Well, it'll be good to celebrate being wrong in that way, I hope. Mary, I'm sure you had more questions.
So, what I think would be good to do is to shift a gear and let's talk about Utah politics.
Sure.
Which, we had a television ad that went viral, and even internationally, which featured our two gubernatorial candidates standing next to each other saying, we don't agree, but essentially we can be friendly and civil to each other. And it was picked up by national media and used as a wonderful example of how, we're not beating each other's brains out here in Utah. And so I think, we did have a civil election for governor here in the state. And I think, does that put Governor-elect Cox in a unique position to be able to reach out to Democrats or to perhaps put a Democrat in his cabinet?
I'm probably not going to give you the answer you want here. I applaud the governor-elect for doing that, but it was an incredibly low-risk thing for him to do. If that race had been 2 points, never. They would have never done that. But Cox was going to win. He was always going to win. Democrats have not won a statewide office since, I think, 92. They're nowhere close to having it happen right now. And Republicans just romped this all over the state in this last election. So, it fits Cox's brand, and his brand is, I'm a very nice guy, right? I'm a nice guy, fits his brand. Chris Peterson, very nice guy as well, it fits his brand. It helps him out, but in the end, it didn't make much of a difference. And I would push back a little bit. We had a civil general election, but that Republican primary for governor was nasty. It was so nasty on some levels. And why? Because the person who won that was going to be the next governor. That was the reality of the situation. So that's why it was such high stakes. That's why they spent millions of dollars on ads. Once that was over with, once Cox won, he was just going to glide path unless something crazy happened. And it would take something incredibly crazy to stop a Republican from being elected in a statewide office here. So I was going to push back on you a little bit. I mean, it was good for him. It got a lot of great press, and it's going to get him a lot of great press going forward. But is Cox going to be like the conscience of the Republican Party? He's from Utah. No. Really, we don't matter. I think that at least on the national stage when it comes to politics, the person who matters is Mitt Romney, right? And Mitt Romney, he gets a lot of good press because he's been pushing back occasionally against the president. I watch the Democrats I know get really disappointed when he does stuff like vote for Amy Coney Barrett. Mm-hmm. Why are you shocked by that? He is a Republican. He was a Republican presidential nominee in 2012. He's not part of the resistance. Trump does things that he doesn't like, and he's going to speak out about that, but he votes with Trump 90% of the time. So, I think a lot of people are projecting their hopes onto that sort of situation. But, in the end, the Cox and Peterson ad is going to be a really nice footnote down the line, but a year from now, nobody's going to remember it.
I want to follow up just, I love hearing like the inside scoop and all of that. And I wonder if from this most recent governor's race, if you have any other sort of inside track stories that you might be able to share that we might not know.
Well, my wife, who's sitting in the office here, in the audience here, she always said that she figured me out. She says, I love to know things and I love to tell people about things. And I've always sort of been that way. And so for me, it was fun during the gubernatorial race, the three leading candidates were Cox, Huntsman, and Hughes, right? And Wright was in there as well, and then but on a daily basis, I'm texting with their campaign managers constantly. And they're telling me stuff, and they're telling me stuff because they want me to write a story that's going to attack one of the other guys and help them out, right? So you really have to ask, you have to think, okay, so why are you telling me that? Or that's interesting information, I'll look into it, right? But you can't just go with that. But, to me, it's just fun being able to, when you hear a story and you're like, okay, so what does this mean to you? Or like when more ballots are counted, you can text the campaign manager and say, okay, so how do I look at that? How bad was that for you? So on and so forth.
Is that how you do it? You get a little thread and then you text the campaign manager about that? Or do you just kind of...
Sometimes they will text me.
Okay.
And it happens up on the Hill all the time. So they have these things. The Republicans run everything, and this will go to your point about Democrats in the state. When I'm covering the legislature, every day I go up there, I have absolutely no reason to talk to a single Democrat. I don't. I mean, I look for reasons, but a lot of times I can't find it because they are completely irrelevant in the process because there are super majorities in both chambers, and by the time something gets to the floor, it's already been decided. Right? We already know what's going to happen to it. So that's where the negotiations are. And so the Senate has a closed caucus all the time on the Republican side. So they go they have lunch 3 times a week towards the end of the session. It's 5 times a week. They close the door and they talk about things. And I'll hear little whispers about that. But on the House side, their caucuses are mostly open on the Republican side, but occasionally they will close them to talk about things. And there are enough people in that caucus who trust me, there are multiple people, who will tell me what was said. And I had a Republican staffer tell me once, we thought you had a recording device in our caucus room because you were quoting people directly. Said we actually tore the room apart looking for your recorder, which I thought was a great compliment. I loved hearing that.
Absolutely.
But one thing that happened a couple of years ago when they were trying the first run, they were going to take a tax reform. They sort of blew up the budgeting process, and it started in the House. And the House closed their caucus, and they decided that they were just going to stick with the budgeting levels as they were and then come back to it later, right? And so everybody in the House, people got mad that their stuff wasn't getting funded, so they started texting me and telling me what happened. So we got a story up real fast that this had blown up. And it was really funny because House Majority Leader Francis Gibson, who is a big guy. He played offensive line at BYU. He's like 6'8". I mean, he's a huge man. And when he comes towards you with purpose, you're not. It's usually not a good thing. And he comes towards me and he said, "Good story, but the Senate found out about our plan from your story, and we generally don't like that. We like to tell them ourselves, and it caused a lot of problems when I did that. But again, it just." But but he said it was a good story and it was right. Yeah. But it was really interesting to be able to dig that out of there, and that's the kind of thing that I love. I love digging out those little nuggets. In one other story, I do remember a few years ago when Attorney General John Swallow resigned. Right, he was in the middle of that huge scandal and he was going to resign. I put out my newsletter early in the morning. I was going to lay down for a little bit longer, just get about another hour's sleep or something, and I get this text from one of my sources, and it says, call me. Anytime I have a source say, call me, I better call them because they have something for me that they don't want on text that could be discovered through a grandma or something.
Wow.
So call me. And so I called them up, and they said, John Swallow is resigning today. I'm like, are you sure on that? They said, yeah. So I called around, got another person who confirmed that. So we went with the story. And then for the next 5 hours, I was on pins and needles because nobody else could confirm it. Oh. Nobody else could confirm it. And I was like, oh, am I wrong? Am I wrong? Am I wrong? I wasn't. He finally called a press conference and resigned that day. But, sometimes you have to be willing to take that risk and confirm it, and tell your editor, this is my story. This is who told me this. This is what I've got. I'm going.
Do you get like a little buzz when you know it's a good story, and then
there's nothing like that feeling. There is that. I live for that moment. There's 2 moments I live for. I live for getting a tip that turned into something great. And I also live for the moment when you call someone up, they answer the phone, and you tell them something that you are not supposed to know, and you tell it to them. There is a hesitation on the other end of the line. There is a moment that you can just hear the wheels turning or their heart stop, and that is one of the most delicious things in my entire life. I live for that moment.
That's fantastic.
I chase that moment like a junkie chases drugs. I chase it constantly.
Fascinating.
And I think that's what makes you a good journalist and one of the best in the state, you know. And I just want to point out, you are a journalist, and so you don't get a tip and run with it. You are sourcing. You are getting a second, a third source to confirm the initial tip that you have, and that's the
But there's also a
difference.
danger to that, right? Because sometimes, I always say that politicians are some of the most gossipy people I've ever met. And so you worry that when you get a tip that, you know, you're just kind of getting caught in this circular thing, that you go back and you get caught up in the circle, and in that circle is the person who heard it first, and then they told this person, and they told this person, so you're caught in that. So you have to be very, very careful that you're not caught up in this untrue wheel of gossip. And sometimes that happens. And I've almost published stories that have gotten caught up in that. But, you know, make one more call. Make one more call. Always make one more call before you do anything. I tell everyone, you know, make one more call. That is the biggest piece of advice I ever got. Make another call.
Wow. Well, and I have to say, for everyone, that you produce a daily email. It's called The Rundown. And so it is the product of your hard work every single day on political stories in the state of Utah.
I try to highlight the top stories. Sometimes there's a little bit of a nugget in there that you're not going to get. That wasn't worth putting online. You know, sometimes you get a little nugget in there. We have links to all of the top political news stories. I mean, it's basically, if you want to understand, if you want to know what's going to happen that day or what you need to know that day, I say, you know, you get smart fast or get up to speed before you head out the door. You know, and I put that out every day. It's a labor of love. I love doing that because I think that there's a space for it. And we've changed our format. We've changed it recently. Some people are adjusting to that. I don't include anything national unless it's like while you were sleeping and it's breaking news, because you can get that stuff elsewhere. There are so many great newsletters out there that focus on national stuff. But if you want something that's, you know, what's happening here, and we've got a really interesting political, there's a lot of stuff that's interesting that's happening, you know. And so if you want to know what's happening here, that's what I'm trying to put out to educate people that way.
I can't let you go without asking about Congressional District 4.
Yep.
The biggest race in this state, incumbent Ben McAdams, challenger Burgess Owens, incredibly, incredibly tight, less than a point difference in the vote total. And as of latest estimates, over $22 million.
Yep, last one I checked. I would not be surprised if between the candidates, and we're still waiting on their financial disclosures, but the candidates, outside groups, probably going to spend north of $25 million, which is clearly one of, if not the most expensive races in the state. And it's, you know, and
for one House district,
yeah,
for one portion of the state,
right.
We're looking at $25 million spent. So I guess a couple of questions to you. Was it worth it? And two, does this bode for the future, or is this a one-time thing?
You know, here, the issue is, so this district came into being in 2012. We had 3 before that. And then through reapportionment, we gained another seat. We almost gained another seat after the 2000 reapportionment. Like, we came within 70,000 people. And there was a lawsuit that they were trying to get to count missionaries overseas to try to get us one seat. I think it came down between us and North Carolina. And so in 2010, after the census, we got another seat. And so they had to decide how to draw it. And so the way that they drew it, it included a large portion of Salt Lake County, mostly a very Republican portion, and a Republican portion of Utah County. What happened was they had drawn that to elect a Republican, because Republicans control the process. Jim Matheson, who was the only Democrat in Congress, he was in the 2nd congressional district, and they gerrymandered his district like crazy. I mean, they had gone after him. It was called one of the worst gerrymanders in the country by the Republican Wall Street Journal, just trashed it. Well, he sort of threw a wrench in that. He said, you know what, I'm going to run in the 4th. I'm not going to run in the 2nd, because you don't have to live in the district where you're representing. That's not a rule. So he decided to run in the 4th, which kind of threw everything off. And he ended up beating Mia Love by almost 800 votes. I mean, it was really close, incredibly close. And he had a number of close elections. And then he retired. Mia Love beat Doug Owens. And then she won again, and then McAdams won, and then Owens won. It is one of 3 seats in the country between 2010 and 2020 to flip partisan control 4 times. Where it went Democrat to Republican to Democrat to Republican. There's 1 seat in California that might flip 5 times. Every election go Democrat, Republican, back and forth. So that being said, I don't know what's going to happen, because the boundaries as they exist are not going to exist in the next election, because we have the reapportionment coming up. Now, we're not going to gain another seat, but they're going to draw the lines, and it's going to be really interesting, because right now we have 2 congressional seats, the 1st and the 3rd, where the Republican wins with about 70% of the vote. Then we have the 2nd, which is Chris Stewart's seat. The Republican wins with about 60% of the vote. I think he was at 58, 59. And that's because the Salt Lake portion, which is really small, broke hard against him. But everywhere else makes up so he could win that. And then you have the 4th, where the Republican wins by, a handful of votes, okay? So what are they going to do? Are they going to create another district like that? And here's the secret, because I know that we passed Prop 4, which is the independent redistricting, but they made a change. So now it is an advisory board, and it's going to be real fun to watch when the legislature completely ignores what they put forward, which they will. They're going to decide on their own. They will consider it, but they don't have to adopt it. So what are they going to do? Are they going to make a district that's a little more safely Republican? Probably, I'm guessing that. In fact, had McAdams won that, which everyone expected, had McAdams won that, they were going to come after him hard and really go after him and try to make it extremely difficult for him to win that seat. Now I don't know what they're going to do, because there are now 4 Republicans in there. Do they draw it to protect Owens? Do they draw the districts to protect all the incumbents, or do they protect 3 of the incumbents and make 1? So it's going to be fascinating to see how that works out. So was it worth it? The Republicans got the seat back. Are we going to see the same thing in the future? I have no idea, because we don't know what the boundaries are going to look like.
Well, that's amazing. Oh my gosh, I just learned so much. This has been amazing. The time has absolutely flown by. Yes. We are going to continue the conversation as usual on the radio show. We'll be on air live, KSUU, Thunder 91.1, and it'll be in a podcast later, our A.P.E.X. Hour podcast. But just kind of a couple of final little parting things. I always like to ask guests, what are you reading right now? Is there anything that's really caught your attention in the book world? And then you've given us some great advice about always make that extra call, and some of the advice to really put yourself in uncomfortable places when you're reading. So the other last question is if you have any other advice for students.
Well, what I'm reading right now, there's a journalist who I admire immensely. His name is Rick Perlstein. Okay. And he has written, this is the 3rd book, and it's called Reaganland.
Reaganland, okay.
It is a massive book. It's about 1,100 pages.
Wow.
And what it is it chronicles the rise of Ronald Reagan. Oh. From his defeat in the Republican primary in 1976 to his ascension in 1980. And Utah plays a really big portion in this. In fact, the 2nd chapter talks about Senator Orrin Hatch, and it's entitled "What's an Orrin Hatch?" And it's a great book, because he's not just a researcher and journalist, but he's a great storyteller, and he really brings everything alive. It goes with a book where he wrote called Nixon Land, where he chronicled that. So this is the third in that series. But there's a part that I love when he talked about what's an Orrin Hatch. That came from Orrin Hatch had just won election to the Senate in 1976, defeating a longtime Democrat, and people hadn't heard his name before. So Carter is the president. People in New York are having these Jimmy Carter parties, right? They're having Jimmy Carter themed parties. And this tidbit came from a New York magazine article that he dug up, because he's such an incredible researcher, that these people who were throwing a party, they wanted to have one that was different. So they just saw this weird name in the newspaper, and so they invited people to an Orrin Hatch party, and nobody knew what they were talking about, and they said people thought it was an anagram, or they were going through and trying to research it in the library. So anyway, it's a fascinating book. It talks about how anti-tax forces and the Christian right all came together to push Ronald Reagan into office. Fascinating book. It's just incredible. So that is what I'm reading. If you want a really good, solid opinion, right-leaning website, go to thebulwark.com.
The Bulwark. Okay.
These are people who do not support Donald Trump, but they are conservatives. Mm-hmm. They are old school conservatives, and they really bring a conservative, perspective to the news and opinion. It's just great, and they have a great podcast that's every day that I listen to as well. So that's good to listen to. Advice for students: just don't take anything as face value. And things are moving so quickly, right? It's hard. I actually had someone tell me this. It's hard to see history in what the forces that are moving us in slow motion, because everything is moving so fast. Everything is moving so fast. So this moment that we're in, so fast, but we don't know where we're going, right?
Yeah.
So appreciate it, but don't think that what is happening now is what is going to happen in the future. The mistake so many people in our political system make is the last thing that they assume that the last thing that's going to happen is, or the last thing that happened is the last thing that is going to happen. Nobody thinks down the line. We don't see that at all. So, you hear the Republicans saying, well, we just cemented a conservative majority on the Supreme Court for a generation. Are you sure about that? Because we've got Justice Breyer, who's 82. Mm-hmm. You got Justice Alito, who's 70. Mm-hmm. Justice Thomas, who's 72. Not everybody's going to live to be 96.
Right.
So Joe Biden could appoint three justices, and then we're back where we started. So never assume that the last thing that happened in politics is the last thing that is going to happen, because it's not.
That's great advice for life. I mean, when you have a failure or when you have something, don't assume it's the thing. Keep looking forward. So thank you for that so much. Well, with that, we'll sign off. Thank you to Mary. Thank you to Bryan. It has been such a joy. I look forward to the conversation continuing. It's been a pleasure to have you guys here. Thank you. And with that, we'll say goodbye, and we'll see you all in January. Good luck. Happy 2021.